Welcome to Teaching Peace. This series of conversations is the result of a collaboration between the New York City Council of Mennonite Churches Education Committee, the Groundswell Group, and the Brooklyn Peace Center. We begin each episode by acknowledging the land upon which these organizations sit. We recognize that we are located in the Lepanoking, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Lenape people. We acknowledge the Lenape community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement is a small part of our ongoing work to dismantle the legacies of settler colonialism and white supremacy. On Teaching Peace, we engage in conversation with clergy and clinicians, artists and activists, and community leaders and practitioners to explore various pedagogies of peace building from across disciplines and socioeconomic and geographic contexts. In this season, we are in conversation with leaders of peace centers from around the world, including Los Angeles, Belfast, Quito, and Cape Town. Today, we are in Belfast, and I am Addie Banks. I am a former pastor and currently the chairman of the New York City Council of Education Committees of the New York City Council of Mennonite Churches Education Committee and executive director of the Groundswell Group, a Peace and Justice Resource Center in the Northwest Bronx, created originally to strengthen the Anabaptist peace witness in New York City. Today, our usual host, Jason Storbakken, is on vacation, and I am joined by another member of the Education Committee, and I will invite Greg to introduce himself.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here. My name is Greg Vanderbilt. I'm coming from Northern Manhattan, also Lenape lands, where I'm a student at Union Theological Seminary and a participant, co-instigator maybe in the New York City Council of Mennonite Churches Education Committee and the Brooklyn Peace Center. Also, before coming to New York, I was in Indonesia and saw the effects of conflict and peace building that are defined in sectarian terms. And so very happy to hear and learn from our brother Gordon McDade today. So let me introduce Gordon briefly. In this episode of Teaching Peace, we are in conversation with Gordon McDade from Belfast, Northern Ireland. Gordon's Twitter bio reads this way: coach, mediator, chaplain, mentor, Jesus follower, amazed by grace. As our conversation progresses this afternoon, I hope Gordon will share the connections among these identities in the Ministry of Reconciliation that he is part of in Northern Ireland, especially this concept of becoming a community chaplain in the streets and in the lives of all of his neighbors. Together with Karen Sethuraman, Gordon is among the instigators of I love this phrase, a peace and reconciliation hub, and a community that is setting aside the forms of the church to connect with people for whom those forms no longer have meaning. A community, which gathers in many kinds of spaces, is named Soulspace, and also goes by the name the Down community. Down is in County Down. So by way of finishing this introduction and hoping Gordon will share, let me read their identity statement. The Down community exists for the whole, in capital letters, whole community. We are a community who value people more than programs, and so we are less concerned about maintaining institutional religion. As a community, we want to exemplify good community by looking after each other, our neighborhood, our communities, and beyond. Our values: love, grace, acceptance, generosity, hospitality and creativity, influence and risk. So Gordon, welcome to Teaching Peace.
Thank you so much. Hi, Addie. Hi, Greg. Lovely to be here. That's quite the introduction.
So we always start with a question that's both to the heart of matters and hard, I'm afraid. So, okay. But we really want to learn from you. Considering the context of your life and work, and in particular this season, Gordon, how do you define peace?
How do I define peace? I suppose I would begin by how I wouldn't define peace, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So in Northern Ireland, we had a peace treaty known as the Good Friday Agreement, which was signed on Good Friday in 1998. So there are those who would say that that we've had peace since Good Friday 1998. The interesting thing about that is that we have more peace walls in Belfast these days than we had during the conflict. And there are still people losing their lives. There are still organizations driven by sectarian bitterness and difference who are active. And so for us, it's important to realize that peace is more than just an absence of conflict. So we've had an absence of conflict, certainly on the scale that we would have seen during the Troubles. We have an absence of conflict, but I don't know that we have peace. And so peace for us is not an automatic result of signing a peace agreement. Peace needs to be built, and peace needs to be intentionally pursued. And peace is not a byproduct of anything else. And so for me, the word that comes to mind is the word shalom, which has the idea of wholeness on every level, and wholeness in a positive way, something not to be taken for granted, but something to be stewarded wisely and cherished and worked at and regarded as precious, and something that even though you might think you have no conflict, that doesn't mean you have peace. So peace for me is shalom and wholeness. And even though we work around peace walls, the real work that needs to be done is around the walls in people's hearts, and the walls in people's minds, and the walls in people's words, and the walls in people's attitudes. So we may live in the shadow of a wall and work around walls all the time, but the real walls are the internal ones. And so for us, it's about dismantling spiritual, psychological, emotional, sectarian, political, all manner of walls that we encounter. And most of those are higher than the 30-foot physical walls that we work around in our daily jobs. That's peace for me.
Thank you, Gordon. Two follow-up questions that are sort of connected. Greg read your community's 8 core values, and the last 2 are very intriguing: influence and risk. Tell us how you see these 2 values impacting the way Soulspace, which is the way that you are describing your church space, how does this invite people to meet and follow Jesus, this risk and influence?
Sure. It might be helpful for me to give you a little bit of context that I think will inform where the values have come from. So Northern Ireland has about 1.8 million people. About a quarter of those people are in the greater Belfast area. Belfast is divided into north, south, east, and west. And we work in north and west Belfast, which are quite challenging areas. And North Belfast is like a patchwork quilt of communities that sit side by side. In our context, it's Protestant and Catholic communities. So in Northern Ireland, the community is segregated really from very early on. Our kids are educated separately. And so Protestants and Catholics would very rarely meet until you maybe go to university when you're 18. And so we live in, ghettos would be too harsh a word, but we live in areas that are single identity for the most part. There's a little bit of integration goes on in South Belfast and further out from the city. But in the city, there's real division. And so in North and West Belfast, where we work, there are what are called interface areas. And interface areas are where two opposing communities sit geographically beside one another. And very often those communities don't really get on. Relationships can be strained. There can be a lot of poverty. There can be a lot of antisocial behavior, all manner of things. And very often, to keep those communities from killing each other, sometimes literally in the past, walls were erected to keep those communities apart. Sometimes there are gates along those walls, and those gates are closed whenever things get particularly difficult. We work in two former churches because there aren't lots of churches in the inner city. There's a little bit of church planting going on, traditional church planting, but there aren't that many churches. So there are lots of former church buildings, and we work in what used to be a Presbyterian church building, which is now an arts centre. And we're based there in North Belfast, and we work in a former Methodist church that now is an inter-community centre in West Belfast. Both of these buildings are in interface areas. And certainly in West Belfast, we work right in a peace wall. So the wall runs through the middle of the building. And if you go up to the roof, you can look out, and on one side, there's the Protestant Shankill Road, and on the other side, there's the Catholic Springfield Road. So North and West Belfast intersect. This wall runs through the church. And so we work right in the wall, the peace wall. And so the challenge for us is to be present there. And that was really where our community chaplaincy idea came from, because we recognized that our work is incarnational. It's about presence. It's about being. It's about relationships. It's about doing life. It's not so much about event or program. It's about living. It's about shoulder to shoulder, laughing with those who laugh, crying with those who cry, identifying with people in their hurt. Because whether you're from one side of the community or another, the whole community has suffered so much in the 30 years of conflict. 3,000 people dead over 30 years in Northern Ireland, and still a lot of sectarianism and a lot of mistrust going on. So for us, the influence is not really from preaching. We don't really preach very much at all. The influence for us is about getting alongside and incarnationally seeking to love unconditionally, seeking to accept, to listen, to embrace when we were allowed to weep with those who weep, to mourn with those who mourn, and to journey with those who will let us. And that's a real challenge, because influence comes from who you are and not from what you say. Because one of the things that the church gets accused of is that we're really good in theory. You know, we have lots of words and lots of talk and lots of sermons, but really people want to see Jesus. They don't just want another talk or another word. And so for us, influence comes by getting alongside. And the risk kind of goes along with that, because getting alongside means you don't get to choose. You don't get to choose who you identify with. You don't get to choose to be with people like you. You just get alongside people. There's a common humanity. And so risk involves seeing beyond labels and seeing beyond social categories and seeing beyond religion and seeing beyond whatever, just having a Jesus identity. And we have discovered that actually Jesus is pretty popular. People kind of like Jesus. They're not that fussed on the church sometimes, but we've never met anybody who had a problem with Jesus. Because it's just that whenever they look at people who say they follow Jesus, they don't always think that they really do. Because sometimes we're very good in theory and lousy in practice. And so the risk comes whenever you don't get a choice in who you love and who you seek to influence. So those values are really important to us, and we have taken risks over the years going into communities where they would be suspicious of us. We have these hoodies. I know this is a podcast, but just in case it ends up anywhere visual, we have these hoodies that we wear that have a Soulspace badge on them, and they're green, so they're easily seen. And on the back we have our community chaplain.
Wonderful.
So we wear those whenever we're kind of out on the ground, because it says to the community, this is who we are. Because really, identity really matters. The Northern Irish issue is identity. We don't know who we are, and we can have automatic dual nationality of the UK and Ireland. So we find that identity is really important. And so for us, part of the challenge is, what does it mean to have an authentic Jesus identity in the middle of a context where people of mixed identities clash over their identity and their culture and their background and their tradition and their historical hurts. So for us, trying to bring a Jesus love, compassion, acceptance, grace. We've also learned that if you want to authentically follow Jesus, it's not hard to get into trouble. In fact, if you're not getting into trouble, you're probably doing it wrong. You know, because Jesus was never safe. Yeah, he just wasn't safe. He was risky.
Exactly. So Gordon, how do you define enemy in that post-conflict zone? How do you define enemy? You're there with everybody.
Yeah, you're there with absolutely. You're absolutely right. And so we have always struggled, certainly in Northern Ireland, with the other, because there's always been the other. And so we have one nation and one people, but with a divided sense of history. Depending who you're talking to, you'll get a different perspective as to who Northern Ireland belongs to, who's the majority, who's the minority, what people stand for. We don't have enemies as followers of Jesus. I don't think we've ever defined anybody as an enemy, but we live in a context where there can so easily be a demonization of the other. And sometimes people have had expectations of us that because of who we are, we won't go certain places or talk to certain people or be around this one or that one or the other one, or build bridges to this political party or that political party. Whereas Jesus doesn't give us the option. He says, love everybody. Everybody is your neighbor. You don't get to choose. So if you're friends with unionists or friends with nationalists, friends with the DUP, which is the largest Protestant political party, or friends with Sinn Féin, which is the largest nationalist party, we just love them all, because Jesus doesn't give you a way out of this stuff. You just love radically, and you love dangerously, and you love riskily. But people don't always understand that. And so sometimes you're called to not play it safe. So actually, yeah, so the other is a big thing in the Northern Ireland context, but we're striving for unity, and that's part of our journey, which we might go into.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. We learned two new phrases that I didn't know before, although I've seen in practice: a peace wall and an interface zone, and both have given me chills.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's an extraordinary place to be. If you guys ever come to Northern Ireland, and I'm inviting you right now to come, we will give you a tour of our beautiful city. mean, Belfast these days is just a beautiful city. It still has these peace walls. They are interesting places to visit. There are a lot of people working very hard to try and take them down, which we really hope one day will happen. But I'm happy to show you.
Okay.
And you'll find that people on both sides of the wall are fabulous people. They've had a lot of pain, but they are remarkably resilient, brave, friendly. We're really friendly people. We just don't get on with each other sometimes. but you're really welcome. We love you.
Wow. But that segregation is painful, yes. So
it really is. And whenever we go out in our chaplaincy tops, it's interesting to walk from one community to another. So you can walk from one community where you'll see British flags and curbstones painted red, white, and blue. And then you'll walk through the wall or through the gates, and you'll come to another community where sometimes you'll see Irish flags, and you'll see a celebration of Irish culture and the Irish language. Though the Irish language now is being taught more on the Protestant side as well. But it is interesting because you can walk from one territory to another through the walls as you walk about in the areas where we minister.
that was something I was wanting to ask you to expand a little bit more about the day-to-day of you and who is the we that's with you as you, and what kind of activities you're doing as you move from place to place, and has that changed over time?
It has. I mean, our background really is that there are three of us who are community chaplains, and then we have a board behind us as well. So we're a registered charity, but there are three of us who work on the ground. We all do something else to support ourselves in the work because we don't get paid for what we do, but we all do something else. We're kind of bivocational. But for the time that we do get together, we've always been really interested in working with people who feel they don't fit in church. That has always been a big thing for us. So in the past, we all worked in large traditional churches outside of Belfast, which were great. And we did a lot of outreach into the community in those contexts. But whenever it came to people from the community fitting into church, we always used to hear the same thing, which was, I don't fit in there. That's not really for me. I don't belong. And so we used to have these questions 10 years ago. Is it possible to do spiritual community for people who feel they don't fit in church? Is it possible to do that? We're still trying to answer that a bit. But we have really worked very hard over the last 10 years in County Down and now in Belfast City, trying to create meaningful spiritual community for the misfits and the people who feel they don't belong. And so we kind of regard ourselves as misfits in many ways. And lots of the wonderful people who are part of our gathering are misfits as well. I don't think I'm insulting them to say that. That they don't fit, they would probably say. And so part of that, actually, I mean, looking back to whenever Karen and I first started, we went through a period that we now call unlearning. And unlearning is really important because we thought we kind of knew how to do this stuff. And then we realized that we only really knew how to do this stuff with people who already believed this stuff. And then we realized that people who don't have any kind of church background at all don't really sing very much, apart from maybe in the shower or in the bath. And they don't really get preached at very often by people. And they don't sing North American worship songs, and they don't do that whole thing. So we had to try and figure out a way of doing meaningful spiritual community for people with no church background at all. And so we kind of went back to go forward We went back to the future, really. And we revisited Celtic Christianity. And that was because we were seeing both Protestant and Catholic people coming to our gathering and being part of our network. And so we wanted to find something that predated the Reformation, because the Reformation really was where it all went wrong, let's face it. So we thought, what if we go back beyond that? And what about our Irishness and our Irish culture? And so we went back to our Celtic Christian roots, and St. Patrick and St. Columkill and some of the Irish missionary saints. And we began to explore what it would mean to be Celtic Christians. So we developed a rule of life, which we still follow and live by, which I could send you a copy of it. We have a rule of life that we developed. We studied the lives of the saints to see what we could learn from them. And we began to reestablish some ancient spiritual practices like Lectio Divina, which we do. And we also had a look at developing some modern icons and using the visual and the artistic to try and express faith, and using silence and rhythms of prayer, liturgies, writing our own liturgies, coming up with our own stuff, really. Some of it was great, some of it was awful, but you might as well have a go at it. So we did all of that and kind of established ourselves as a Celtic Christian type community. So it's very much about our context. It's very much about where we are and what matters to our people. It wouldn't transfer to Manhattan, I don't think, necessarily. Although there's lots of Irish Americans, who knows? But it works for us. And so we kind of discovered that we were Anabaptists by accident. We didn't really set out to be Anabaptists. We didn't know much about them, but we discovered that because we talked about Jesus all the time, and because we were into peace and reconciliation, we're also very into social justice. So we're very into men and women serving together. We have lots of LGBT people who are part of our family as well. We really embrace people who feel marginal. We feel called to the edge. We feel called right to the very edge. And sometimes we feel as though we're holding on to the edge by our Celtic fingertips. Because I think we believe that the edge, sometimes God wants to use the edge to renew the center. And a lot of renewal in the church over the years has come from the margins. And while we're not particularly focused on the renewal of the church, we're having enough difficulties just surviving ourselves. But sometimes conversations will start around our marginality that other churches have noticed and wanted to be part of. So yeah, so I've forgotten the question now, Addie. So I'm just talking about who we are and how we've shaped.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
so what is the role of recognizing trauma, including trauma across generations, and working for healing among the communities that you serve? You talked about this post-conflict zone, these peace walls, the marginalization of people. So, and being a community chaplain, what is the role of recognizing trauma and way that you guys are working towards healing?
Yeah, I mean, this has been, I'll start with this because this has been a very difficult week for Northern Ireland. And that is because just yesterday in the British Parliament, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland announced that the British government are going to legislate in September or October that there will be no further investigation or pursuit of justice for anyone who was involved in either the British Army's activities or activities of paramilitary groups. There's going to be no further bringing people to justice. They're going to draw a line in the sand after 1998 when the peace accord was signed. And so lots of families are not going to get justice, and lots of cases are not going to be pursued, and lots of people are going to get away with what they did on whatever side of the conflict they're on. It has caused a huge outpouring of real pain and trauma, I think. And I'm not a trauma, none of us are trauma experts at all, but it has caused a huge amount of pain because all of a sudden families now are realizing that perpetrators are not going to be pursued anymore. They're going to draw a line and there will be no further prosecutions. And that has caused enormous pain. And our hearts really go out to the families of people who will never get justice now. I think we're hoping that something might happen by way of a truth commission or something like that, where people get a chance to tell their stories. But really, there's a lot of trauma around. So suicide is a particularly high problem in the areas where we work, especially younger men taking their own lives. That happens a lot. And so our ministry really is a ministry of walking about, which we think is very Jesus, really. There's something about going where people are. There's no expectation of people coming to you. Yeah. And then it's about active listening. It's about identification with. It's about empathy and sharing a journey and shedding a tear and identifying with people where they are. Because trauma in our experience is very isolating. And we can't feel people's pain, but we can listen to the stories, and we listen to the stories all the time. Stories of pain, stories of sectarianism, stories of bigotry of all kinds, and it's very difficult. I guess for us, we seek to provide acceptance, we seek to provide community, we seek to provide practical help. So we help in a food bank. We're part of residence groups. We do cleanups, litter lifts. We support the staff in the centers where we work. And we walk around and drink a lot of coffee and talk and listen. So
that work, you're acknowledging trauma, you're allowing people to tell their stories, hiding everything.
That is, Karen has a phrase. Karen has a phrase that she likes to use, which is, I'm going to say this badly, it's a Latin phrase. It may be ascribed to Augustine. It's solvitur ambulando. And solvitur ambulando means we make the way by walking. And Karen likes to say that, and there's a lot of truth in it. We make the way by walking. So a lot of the work we do is kind of pioneering type work, and a lot of the listening and the healing just happens as you live, and just happens as you walk and you journey with people. And sometimes it is about time, and it is about silence. It's not about prescriptive, diagnostic, trying to tell people what we think might be wrong, because there's enough wrong with us.
Companioning people and being with.
Something about being with, and there's something about being vulnerable.
Yes.
And I think the Bible has a whole theology of weakness. Certainly, Paul in 2 Corinthians and other parts as well. There's something about our vulnerability and our sense of weakness, and the transparency of being able to say we we don't have all the answers, but we're journeying with you. And so there's something about accompaniment that I think is important for us, because we don't have the clinical expertise, but we are committed to a pastoral, deep meshing in with our culture and context, even the bits that we really struggle to fit in with. And actually, we have conducted funerals, we've conducted weddings, we will bless anything that moves, just whatever is meaningful for people. And actually, one of the things that the Celts were really into was taking what was already there by way of secular and Christianizing it. So it's whenever you see a cross, and then they put the circle round the cross, like the sun coming up. So we have a Celtic cross made out of tree trunks in our chaplaincy space. And there's something about redeeming the culture as well that the Celts were really into. So don't get rid of everything that's there. Try to redeem it. Try to bring a Christian influence into some of the secular pagan culture that's around. So actually, we're very good at celebrating all of that.
Powerful. That is very powerful. I think that leads into Greg's question around theology, because that right there.
Yikes.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's been really, really beautiful and powerful, the accompaniment. And a chaplain is somebody that, if a chaplain starts providing answers, they've almost failed already.
Yeah, we think that.
So yeah, the question that I would like to, you mentioned already Anabaptism by accident, which I think is maybe the title of at least a chapter in the book you're going to write. But
well be it. Yeah.
That a couple of weeks ago, one of our interviewees, Sue Parker from LA, talked about her communities sometimes failing to engage because they failed to have a deep enough theology. And so I was wondering if we could maybe go a little bit more with the theology of peace building that you are developing, or how does a theological sense or a Christ sense of following discipleship to Jesus Christ push you to peace building, not as a strategy, but as as you've already said, this very core but vulnerable identity?
Yeah, I mean, there is something intensely, well, I suppose what I would say, Greg, to begin with, is that part of our unlearning has been a theological unlearning as well.
Yes.
And I think we have discovered that you cannot take a theological template and somehow place it over any kind of situation that you're in and expect it to apply. So we have, and actually a lot of that even goes right back to language as well, because we have found that in our context of working with unchurched people, is that theological language hinders communication rather than assists it. And something about a commonality in language is really useful for us. I mean, there were times in the early days whenever we were trying to explain the gospel to people, and actually for people who have no biblical background much at all, it even started to sound like nonsense to us, because whenever you're talking to someone who doesn't know anything about it at all, then there were days whenever Karen and I used to say to each other, do you think are we still Christians? Is that and what do you think a Christian is? And do you think there's any kind of is there a kind of lowest common denominator here where we kind of think Jesus is really pretty cool, but apart from that, we're really not completely sure about much else. And so for us, a Christocentrism I think has been fundamental to everything that we're about. For us, peace building is a Christocentric activity. And that's because I think he has been the one who has communicated and modeled and exampled everything that we're about. And he's been the one who has communicated more effectively with our gang, far more than anything else. I mean, some of our guys over the years haven't been able to read or write. And so the example of Jesus has always been a huge thing for us. And so even in our Lectio Divina, it's always from the Gospels. And so we've always been really struck by, John 1, is it 14, in the message about the word becoming flesh and moved into our neighborhood. That's been the phrase in Eugene Peterson's paraphrase. Moving into the neighborhood has always been a huge thing for us. Karen's about to start her PhD in September, and her thing is building a nation of neighbors. That's her phrase, is building a nation of neighbors. And so the idea of neighborhood and community, and the neighborhood as your parish, that's been a big thing, really, I think, for us. And she has developed quite a profile now in speaking about a nation of neighbors. She's been twice recently to speak to the Irish Parliament in Dublin. She's part of a group called Ireland's Future. And really her thing is all about neighbors. What does it mean to be a good neighbor? She has a column in a local newspaper that goes out in West and North Belfast, where she will talk about these kind of themes, but she has a fabulous common touch in the way that she does it. And so for us, there's that kind of Christocentric thing has been a big deal. So the idea of being missional and Jesus sending out his disciples, the idea of people of peace has been huge for us as well, because whenever we couldn't find anybody to help us, we used to ask God to send us people of peace. Because whenever Jesus said, there will be people of peace, find the person of peace.
Yes.
Sometimes it took us, a few dozen tries before we found the person of peace. We sometimes found people of conflict quicker. But if you find a person of peace who is a gatekeeper or a community leader or someone who can connect you and give you credibility, then hug them and be beside them a lot. So the idea of people of peace has been a big thing, I think, for us as well. How is this sounding to you, Greg? I'm trying to sound like a theologian. Karen's the theologian more than me.
No, I mean, it's what we, and as we make the road by walking, we theologize by walking.
Yeah,
so,
I'm sure that's right. And there is something about your feet on the pavement and actually just walking and listening and theologizing as you go that I think we probably do that. I don't know how. Yeah, I think it is much more about it's much more organic for us than organizational. It's much more about existing and traveling and journeying, and conversation is a big thing really as well. I don't think we really at any time do very much preaching, really much at all, actually. We don't find people very receptive to it. And in the early days, whenever we did it, people would fall asleep or swear or, it didn't really, ask lots of questions, then it would take forever. And
Gordon,
so yeah.
The theology. I mean, every one of us is a theologian. You're bringing Jesus, and then people can see what Jesus is like. So you're getting back to the radical theology, and powerful. And it's so inspiring to see Jesus on the move in this way. So Gordon, this has been amazing. We could keep you here for hours, and we've lost
Thanks.
time, looked at our time, so we're gonna just move forward because we haven't even looked at the time. You've engaged us in such an amazing way. The question, and then we're going to just basically close out. In the rest of our time, we'll just continue on with you all over the next few years. This is a divine appointment.
Oh yeah,
So,
hey, and do consider this an invitation to come to Belfast.
we will.
Please, yeah, please.
So, Gordon, the work of peace building often takes generations. You've really illustrated that for us today. So how do you maintain that deep vision? This is a two-part question. How do you maintain that deep vision? And where do you find joy to sustain you in this work? Because you've already shared a lot about how you are maintaining that deep vision. Where do you find joy to sustain work?
One of the things that we're really, really grateful for is the heritage of those who have come before us. That there is definitely something about that. So meeting in two former congregational buildings is really important, because there have been generations of Christians who have met where we now work, even though those expressions of church are no longer working in those communities. And also in West Belfast, the inter-community project that we're part of in the former Methodist Church was set up by a Methodist church and two ecumenical communities, one called the Curra community, which was a community of nuns, and one called the Cornerstone community, which was an ecumenical community on the Peace Wall. None of those communities exist anymore, but they were all there in the worst days of the Troubles for many years. We are really aware and motivated by that we stand on their shoulders. There is something about celebrating where you've come from and the foundations that were laid long before you get there. And so for us, that's been a real inspiration. And I think we also draw that inspiration from the saints as well, because St. Patrick's and Columkill, and all the rest of the saints are really so important for us. So but we do have a real sense of being where we feel God wants us to be. I think in the past we have found it really challenging, because sometimes you get fed up Christians who come along who are not always the most helpful. We're really interested in working with people on the margins. The joy that we draw is the joy of individual stories. And so the power of story is really important for us. And there's something about gathering the stories. So whenever we meet as our gathering, it's been a while since we have, but when we did meet, we used to do a thing called What's Your Story? Where you would give someone the space to be able to say, this is who I am. They didn't need to come up with some spiritually deep thing, that they could just say, this is who I am, and this is where I'm from, and this is what's going on with me. There's something about giving someone the dignity of space to express themselves and being able to listen to what they say and affirm their value and their worth. That really matters. Lots of the people in the communities where we work feel forgotten. And there's something about letting people know that they haven't been forgotten. And so whenever we hear a powerful story of change, or whenever we see someone who's been able to move through real challenge and into a much better place, or just being able to accompany somebody to a better place, that's where we get the joy. It's all about the story, I think. And thankfully, our story isn't finished yet. So we're going to write a few more chapters yet.
Yes,
Amen.
Thank you, Gordon. Greg.
And story is relationship. And that's something we really learned from you. Yes.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for this really meaningful conversation.
Oh, you're welcome.
As we close out, we often like to know a little bit more about you. So this is what we call a lightning round. So
Okay.
we'll ask a series of either ors and just whatever comes to mind.
Okay.
And it's nothing deep. It's only so that we can know a little bit more about you before we meet you in Belfast. Addie.
Okay.
So, on time or early?
Always late.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee always.
Novel or movie?
Oh, novel.
Ocean or mountains?
Ocean.
Big party or small gathering?
Small gathering. Not a party animal.
Sweet or salty?
Salty.
When you're in transit, music or podcast?
Podcast always.
And this singing or dancing?
I am no dancer, so I'm going to go with singing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Greg.
For teaching peace by your words and your witness and your wisdom. I just want to give a plug to learn more about Soulspace and Gordon and Karen's work in community chaplaincy and this transformational journey of their ministry. I'd like you to check out the Sent Conference 2021 online at Mennonite Mission Network. I think it's worth hearing more about what you guys are doing. So I really And thank you all to each of you who have tuned in for this conversation. If you want to hear more of these kinds of conversation on teaching peace, whether you're listening on a podcast or YouTube, remember to like, subscribe, and share. And you can see us on the Groundswell Group platform or the Brooklyn Peace Center. And again, thank you for joining us on Teaching Peace, and continue to walk in peace. God bless you.
Thank you. And thank you again, Gordon.
Thank you both.